From Georgetown University, right here in Washington, D.C., is Imad Shaheen. He is a visiting professor of political science. Dr. Shaheen, thanks for joining us. What, in your view, is the root of the conflict in Yemen?
Well, this is a mixed package of political conflict, sectarian conflict, and proxy war. If you look, the Houthis, now one of the fighting parties, has been fighting the government for the past maybe 10 years. From 2004 until 2010, it has waged at least 6 mini wars with the Yemeni government. In this war, of course, they were supported by the Iranians on one side, and the Yemeni government then, under the leadership of Ali Abdullah Saleh, the ousted president in 2011, was supported by the Saudi government. Both parties were supplied from Iran and from Saudi Arabia, respectively, by weapons, by finance, by cachet, and of course that war waged for a long period of time. So this is one thing. The second, of course, issue is the failure of integration. The Houthis are different in terms of a sect. They are Shiite Houthis in a predominantly Sunni country, and the country and the government has been controlled then by mainly two political parties, Sunni parties, the Islah party, the Reform Party, and also which is the religious right of center party, and the General Congress Party, which is the government party. The Houthis, as well as many other political factions or segments, were excluded from this power-sharing formula. That's why. So there is some kind of underlying grievances, definitely, as well as, of course, political ambitions and some kind of opportunism, because of the failure of the government itself, the failure of the central authority to extend its dominion over the entire territories,
right,
and also outside support, the Iranian support for the Houthis. So of course, there is this element of expediency and opportunism where there is an advantage. They took advantage, of course, of this collapsing government to extend their authority.
Now we have the Saudi Arabians who are involved with their warplanes. They're bombing targets in Yemen. That prompted the New York Times to warn that the Saudi intervention in Yemen could lead to a wider conflict involving Iran that would further destabilize Yemen. Do you believe that to be the case?
This is a very plausible scenario. The continuation of armed conflict for quite some time, maybe a few years. And now, of course, with the succession in Saudi Arabia and all these kind of uncertainties and the need also to consolidate and to need to switch or shift the narrative and the focus from a quest for democracy in the region to a quest of security. That's exactly what we see now. If you look at the narrative about ISIS, the narrative about Iran, the narrative about the Houthis now in Yemen, and all this kind of security-centered issues. So there is, of course, some kind of a deliberate intention to reconfigure the alignments in the region, and that I think was very clear in the Arab Summit that was held a few days ago, in its proposal to, or plan to form a unified Arab force in order to intervene and have this kind of interventionist capacity. So this, of course, one very possible scenario that will have an extended war that will, of course, and the other hand, of course, Iran. Iran has also some interest in shifting the pressure from its ally in Damascus, Bashar al-Assad, who is not doing very well, and opening a new front with another ally, the Houthis, who are Shiites, in order, of course, to expand and put pressure on Saudi Arabia and shift this kind of focus from the north to the south. So there is, all these kind of complicated issues. Egypt also has a role in, of course, offering its services, especially in a kind of a military-backed government and a coup government that would like to present itself as a new policeman, effective, efficient policeman in the region that can serve Saudi interests and also can protect the backyard of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So this is, of course, one possibility, an extended war.
Yemen occupies a very strategic position in the Gulf. It lies alongside some very important oil routes. So are there going to be consequences for the international community here? Should countries like the United States be concerned at what is going on there?
Definitely, there is a concern about the waterways, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, and of course that I'm sure there are so many forces that are, or many states, regional as well as international, that would be very much concerned about Bab el-Mandeb and the strategic position of Yemen. That's why I was going to say that this protracted, or if the war and the armed conflict just extends to a prolonged period of time, there might be two possibilities here. One, which could be a Lebanization of Yemen, meaning that the Lebanon model would evolve in terms of some kind of power sharing formula in which the Houthis will constitute a part of the power structure, or the worst case would be some kind of separation to actually, for that particular purpose that your question asked about, which is the protection of the waterways, Bab el-Mandeb.
We see yet another Middle Eastern country in conflict here. Is the United States, on the other hand, partly to blame for what is going on there? Because we can trace a lot of this instability in the Middle East back to the invasion of Iraq. Was it a mistake? Should the U.S. take some of the blame?
Of course. Now there are so many people, even policymakers and former diplomats and policymakers admitting that the invasion of Iraq under any pretext was wrong, was a mistake. And I think, the proof for this is that ISIS did not, or had not existed before the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So definitely, occupation, invasion radicalizes domestic and native elements, and leads, of course, to for many of them what they consider as a legitimate right for resistance, and actually for armed struggle. This is, of course, one dimension in it. The second dimension also is the inability of local government, domestic governments, to actually evolve or develop their systems in a way that will include, integrate, and also accommodate the discontent and the growing discontent and dissatisfaction from many marginalized and for years oppressed social segments in society. This is something that many Middle Eastern governments have to start to reckon with. This idea of suppression, this idea of exclusion, this idea of authoritarianism, that's exactly what it breeds. It generates violence, it generates radicalism, and it generates a situation that becomes extremely, extremely difficult to control.
Dr. Emad Shaheen, thanks for joining us, sir.